Welcome to another episode of Mexican in the Kitchen. For this recipe, people use different kinds of protein, but in this case I'm using shredded chicken. If you have been following this channel, you're probably an expert already. I'm going to have a pot with some water. I'm going to add a bit of salt. I am adding half an onion, or one really small one. I'm also adding a bit of coriander. I know there's people who doesn't like coriander, so if you don't like it, just skip it, and you could add maybe a piece of celery, or you could add maybe one tomato, or anything that will give a bit of flavor to our chicken and also to our broth, because we will use it later. My pot is on a 4 out of 6, so medium high fire. I'm waiting for my water to boil, and once it starts boiling, I'm going to add the chicken. For this recipe, I'm adding 350 grams of chicken thighs. We're using the chicken broth, so if you have some chicken bones lying around, chicken feet, you can also add a couple here, because we want the broth to have a bit more flavor. If you don't have, don't worry, we'll use it as it is. After 40 minutes, our chicken should be perfectly cooked, and at this point we can set it aside, we can take it out of there, we can wait for a bit so it starts to cool down, and we can start shredding it. We can also wait for the broth to cool down a bit, because we're going to use it. Tomatillos are the base for salsa verde, but it's very hard to find them fresh where I live, so instead I'm using this salsa verde verdes. It's Mexican made, it's really good. I'm just going to tweak it a bit, and this is going to be the perfect base for making our sauce. You can find this in some stores in Finland, but I get mine from lastunas.fi. I'm going to leave the link in the description. This step is optional, and you can skip it if you don't own a blender or if you don't like coriander. I will add one small onion or half a large one. I will add a handful of coriander. Now I'm going to take the same jar where the sauce was, and I'm going to fill it with chicken broth. This will rinse my jar a bit. We will take everything that was left there, and also we are adding a bit more liquid to our sauce. That way we can throw it to a pan, cook it for a while, and we don't mind if it reduces a bit, because it's going to be a bit more liquid. It will be a bit more sauce than we had, and also it will mild a bit of an acid flavor that tomatillo gets when it gets preserved, as is the case in this sauce. That's also partly why we're adding the coriander and the onion. Once our jar is full, I'm just going to shake it a bit, and we can add it to our blender. We can now add the broth to our blender, and we can just blend everything. I'm going to give it some time. I want to make sure everything blends completely. We want to have a smooth, quite nice sauce. We don't want any chunks in there, and then we can continue. If you have seen other videos from this channel, I'm sure you know how to shred chicken. You take 2 forks, or you can also use the hands. Just make sure everything shreds into pieces that are around the same size. If you want larger chunks, you can leave larger chunks. If you want it to be really fine, thin, tiny threads, you can also do that. Completely up to what you prefer. And once we're done, we're going to set this aside, because we're going to use this chicken later. I have this pan on a 3 or 4 out of 6, so medium high fire. I'm going to add a bit of oil, and I don't want the oil to be too hot before I add my sauce, because you add water to oil that doesn't mix, it's going to start jumping all over. So while it's cold, I'm going to add my sauce. Once we have the sauce in the pan, we want to wait for about 10 minutes, let it boil. We want to make sure to mix it from time to time. We don't want anything to burn. You might have noticed I haven't added any salt, but the water where we cooked our chicken, so our chicken broth, had some salt already. The sauce usually has a lot of salt, so it's better to make it like this, taste it, and if you think there's some salt missing, you can season later. Once our sauce has been boiling for about 10 minutes, it should be ready. You can continue reducing it for as long as you want. It depends on how thick you like your sauce. Personally, I like it a bit more liquid, more runny, and I like having my chilaquiles a bit soggy, so I like having a lot of sauce. But of course, how you serve them is completely up to you. When I went to the store, I found these tortilla chips that are made with real tortillas. They're not this kind of snack nacho thing you would buy from the store usually. So I'm going to use these. I know in Mexico you can find these kind of thing. I'm sure in the US you could also find them. Usually you would use tortillas, cut them, deep fry them, but in this case it's a lazy version of chilaquiles. I'm going to use a large plate, usually a bowl, because I want them to have a lot of sauce. I'm going to throw a handful of my tortilla chips. There's 2 ways of doing this. Some people will throw the tortilla chips into the pan, mix them with the sauce, leave them there for a while, and you will have soggy chilaquiles. Some people prefer to throw the tortilla chips on a plate, cover them with hot sauce, and eat them as soon as possible so they are still crispy. As I usually say, how you serve them, how you prefer them is completely up to you. After the sauce, I'm going to throw some chicken in there. Some people mix the chicken with the sauce as well. Some people throw the chicken before and add the sauce on top. Completely up to you. I'm going to add a bit of creme fraiche or sour cream, depending on what you can find. Traditionally, you would use sour cream. Usually, I would sprinkle some queso fresco on top, but here in Finland I haven't seen it, so I'm using some fetta kind of cheese, salad cheese, just sprinkle a bit on top. I'm also adding some onion. Some people add cubes, some people add tiny strings. I like to cut it into rings because I just like it that way. You can also do it however you prefer. I will also sprinkle a bit of coriander. Again, if you don't like it, you can skip. Finally, I'm going to add some avocado. Some people might call it the green gold because, you know, it's delicious. You can find it everywhere in Mexican food. It gives a bit of a creamy, fresh taste and people just simply love it. This is how I make the green chilaquiles. This recipe is very simple. I really like it because it's something that all the ingredients are basically pre-made. You just have to make a couple steps. You can skip the blending and everything is quite simple. And this is a perfect dish. It's really nice. It's something that is very well known in Mexico. And it's something that you can do with a lot of different kind of sauces. You will find a lot of variations. You can use chicken. You can just skip the protein. You can add a fried egg on top. You can also add some like steak. This is a dish that is very simple to make. It's very cheap. And I don't know why they don't do it more often. I know outside of Mexico it's not very common, I guess. Maybe in the US it's more normalized because, of course, many of these dishes are common already there. But here in Europe, I've seen it on a restaurant maybe once or twice. And it's weird because it's really good. Most people I've seen try it really love it. It's cheap and it's something just easy to make. So I hope you try it at home. Press like, subscribe, activate the bell, all those kind of things. And see you in the next one.